Bhutan announces the highest civilian award for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The King of Bhutan highlights years of an unconditional friendship as well as cooperation from India during the corona epidemic. To talk more about that, I have with me Professor Swaran Singh. He teaches at the School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. Professor Swaran Singh, thank you very much for joining. What does it mean when Bhutan bestows the highest civilian honor upon Prime Minister Modi? And, the Prime Minister, Dr. Shering, says that it is for the unconditional friendship that India has offered to Bhutan.
Thank you, Amrit. Congratulations to you as well. I think all of you contribute to how Indian foreign policy together is building India's image around the world. And as you mentioned, it's only one more such an award to come to India's Prime Minister. We know a series of dozens of actually countries, Bangladesh, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Palestine, yes, Bahrain, Maldives, Russia, and even Legion of Merit in the United States. So one after another, countries have begun to recognize not just the rising stature of India, but the personal involvement of Prime Minister in conduct of India's foreign policy, particularly when it comes to Bhutan. I think you would remember both after his first election as Prime Minister to the national legislature in 2014, and second time again being sworn in after 2019 elections as Prime Minister. The first country that Prime Minister Modi decided to visit was Bhutan.
Yes.
To underline how, despite being a small country, the value that Prime Minister attaches to neighborhood first policy, and also how rapid the changes have occurred, particularly after that long-drawn Doklam crisis of 2017, when India stood with Bhutan for 73 days, showcasing the friendship and the care that India has for its neighbors. And now relationship has really taken a momentum. Not just the four major big mega hydropower projects which are constructed, two are under construction, one more contract was signed June 2020. But relationship is moving into fintech, for example, into space technology. 4,000 plus Bhutanese citizens are studying in Indian universities. So there's a certain momentum also which we have noticed in the bilateral relationship. But here I think clearly the credit lies to the personal involvement of Indian Prime Minister and the kind of warmth that he brings, as the Bhutanese like to call him, a spiritual personality as they have described him, and the role that India played in pandemic. Again, the first country to send vaccines in January this year, again in May, was Bhutan. 1.5 lakh vaccines first, 4 lakh vaccines again, also medicines before that. So it's a reflection of personal attention that Prime Minister gives to some of these very significant elements of India's engagement with neighborhood and the rest of the world, which is being recognized by dozens of countries. And Bhutan, I think, is just adding on to that credibility and kind of shine that India is gaining over a period of time as emerging nation, which has enormous role to play at the regional level and also beyond the region.
Professor Swaran Singh, you say Bhutan has an enormous role to play in the regional level. It's a small country, a landlocked small country, largely peaceful. In the Indian foreign policy matrix, what is the importance of Bhutan?
Let me say two things that immediately come to me that makes Bhutan an example for rest of the world to view. One is, you would remember, the king had started something called Happiness Index.
Index, yes.
And the whole world is debating whether this mad pursuit for GDP and material growth is sufficient way of explaining development. Are there other components? And the debate is whether, per capita GDP is the only way to understand progress a nation makes. Second, of course, king himself had started a great example of allowing democracy to survive and thrive in Bhutan, which is also a great example of how transformation can occur from the top down itself. In that sense, Bhutan again is an example of being a kind of a thriving democracy, and which brings India and Bhutan much closer because both are really democratic nations. And one could add on even the way they have handled their environmental policies, not pursuing again mad manufacturing race to sort of destroy the environment, but to protect their environment. In fact, they are claiming to be contributing to the sort of carbon footprint in terms of having absolutely zero or minus carbon footprint as far as Bhutan is concerned. So it's a small country, but even at the global, narratives of various challenges that the world is facing, whether in terms of providing representation to the masses, in terms of democratic systems, or dealing with the climate challenge and environment issues, these are examples which make Bhutan really visible in the world. And I think, if nothing else, at least we still live in the world of sovereign nations, and Bhutan has a very important vote in all forums, whether they are regional or global. And let me just in 5 seconds add, I think it's very unusual way how not just India has stood by Bhutan, but how Bhutan also has stood by India. So this kind of award is only a celebration of that enormous and unique relationship that India has had with Bhutan. And I think this is a signal of how India's engagement with the countries is changing completely. Several awards have come from West Asia, for example. That should be seen as a completely unexpected change in India's engagement. India is now friendly to almost all West Asian countries, and several awards, Bahrain, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, Oman, they are coming from there. It's a recognition, I think, of India's rising stature, but also of the personal engagement and indulgence, indeed, that Prime Minister has shown in engaging several leaders around the world, such hectic travels around the world, and creating that personal bonhomie and warmth. That's why these kind of dozens of awards are coming to the Prime Minister himself. And of course, it's a both ways. It's rising India, which is contributing, and it's a personal stature of Prime Minister, which is also contributing to rise of India.
True. Okay, let's try and understand, Professor Singh, from the Bhutanese point of view. Yes, we've had the historical relations with them. We've been perhaps their friendliest neighbor, or a neighbor on which for a very long time they were dependent, a neighborhood who did not dominate them, the neighbor who helps them, grow. India helped them set up hydrological plants there, then buy a surplus electricity from them, in a way boost their economy, be it in education, be it in, you mentioned the 5.5 lakh vaccines, technology, fintech, space exploration, etc. So there is a robust cooperation. China, but has made overtures in the past to Bhutan as well. What for the Bhutanese lies that they yet choose to see India as a more reliable neighbor and a more a reliable partner?
I think clearly, even in terms of geology and geography and history, the leaning, so to say, or excess of waterways, pathways, connectivity comes much natural when if you're a Bhutanese thinking of your connectivity to the outside world. Connectivity with India comes natural. Then, of course, you could add on to factors of culture, religion. Buddhism, for example, connects these two countries a great deal, and Bhutanese are coming to several, the Buddhist sites to India regularly. And then, of course, the whole political system of democracy and the whole attitude that China has had, for example, in terms of exerting its claims on what it considers to be its territory vis-a-vis Bhutan, and how India handles those issues in case there are any issues of that nature. So I think it's a very different kind of relationship. Of course, we recently, last month, had heard of an MOU being signed between China and Bhutan to take their border negotiations forward. That had, sort of created certain amount of, concern in some of the quarters in India. But then this highest civilian award being conferred on Indian Prime Minister is again a reflection of how India's relationship with Bhutan is completely different. It's not driven by securities or strategic or commercial sort of interests. It is but inherent. In fact, the way they describe the Prime Minister, they treat him as if one of their own in that sense. Indeed, let me also underline, this is the first time since 2018 when this award was started in Bhutan that it has been conferred on a foreign national. So, that's a very different kind of sort of symbolism that we notice here when it comes to Bhutan in that sense. And how India stood in 73 days of eyeball to eyeball during the Doklam crisis. India's relationship is completely different, and I think gestures like this really push the relationship beyond just state-to-state relationship that brings intersocietal warmth warmth of leaders, how they want to engage with each other and work together. So, of course, enormous contribution India does make, and it's not unknown fact that between 12 to 15% of Bhutan's budget is actually India's assistance. So that kind of unusual relationship is on one side, but here is a recognition of warmth which is not just interstate, it's not just official and formal recognition, it's a recognition of the intersocietal individual personalities relating to each other, leaders finding each other perfectly at home with each other. In that sense, I think this is a clear reflection of Prime Minister being a very, very popular person in several countries, but also in this case very popular in Bhutan. Indeed, after his 2 visits, they are now expecting him to visit Bhutan again when this award will be conferred. They are expecting Prime Minister to personally visit and receive that award. And these are expectations that some of India's neighbors have, that despite these difficult times of pandemics, the Prime Minister would be taking that bold initiative or maybe taking a travel to Bhutan again. So reflection of very multifaceted, very deep-rooted and very interpersonal and intersocietal relationship that Bhutan has shared with India. This is a reflection of that kind of unusual relationship, and of course recognition of Prime Minister's personal contribution to that.
All right, Professor Swaran Singh, we'll have to leave it there. Many thanks for joining us and sharing your insights with us. Thank you.